is the full set review for Phyrexia All Be One. Set is fantastic, and this is part 1 of 3. So today we're going to go through the system explanation and the mechanics and the way your games are likely to play out. And then I'll cover the common and uncommon, multicolored artifact and land cards, then the white cards and the blue cards. Tomorrow I will cover the rest of the commons and uncommons, and the day after that we will, well, the day after that is early access. I'm going to be just playing with other streamers and content creators. And the day after that I will schedule a time to do the rares. This set is going to be a lot of fun to play because there's a lot of difference in the card values. And the best a card can perform and the worst a card can perform. So very quickly, I'll go through the system. I use a 1 to 10 scale that's a little different from other content creators. A 1 is a card you should never play. A 2 is a card you should do your best not to play. You will occasionally be stuck with them. 3 is filler. They are your nuts and bolts. You will need some number of 3s in your deck. Don't worry too much if you have a few, as long as you have some 4s, which are the above average cards. They're a little bit stronger. A 5 is just a strong card. You will often find yourself first picking 5s and you won't be too upset about it. A 6 is a card that you always play in that color. A 7 is a reason to play that color. These are your premium removal cards, your efficient cards, the ones that come down first and protect themselves, the ones you craft your game plan around. And 8 is a card that you should do your best to make fit. These tend to be rares. You will seldom have an uncommon or a common at an 8. A 9 is a card you will always play, and a 10 is a card that wins the game when you play it. There are very few 10s ever in Magic. There were 3. Not really. There were some 9s. Brothers War had a lot of 9s and 10s in like Wormcoil Engine. Older examples would be like Umezawa's Jite. Cards like Portal New Phyrexia. Oh, hey! Thank you, Lennon. I guess we went through the portal to Phyrexia, and now we're here. And then I use a slightly different system, so thank you so much for the subscription, Lennon. You're very welcome. So the floor of I give everything a floor value, a ceiling value, and an average value, and then an effort. So the floor is the worst card the worst the card will be. A ceiling is the best the card will be, and then an effort is how hard it is to bridge that gap. So it might be in how you play, it might be in how you build. Flesh Gorger was a beast. You could reasonably make an argument that a basic island is a 10, but that regards pick order. So if you pick your island like it's a 10 out of your pack, then go for it. All right, so I'm gonna go through the mechanics first, and there's some good ones, and they are very interlocked. So the first mechanic is for Mirrodin. Yes, there is an exclamation point in the mechanic name. And it's like Living Weapon, but instead of making germs, you make 2/2 rebels, which means that your bodies are more relevant and you can move the equipment around right away. There are 8 instances of cards with 4 Mirrodin at common or uncommon. 6 of them are pretty good, 2 of them are really bad. They tend to be playable in the in the decks where you want the body. It's a great mechanic, but it's kind of, there's not a lot of cards with it. So you don't want cards that need the bodies to play with 4 Mirrodin. You want cards that need the equipment. And there are cards that need the equipment because there are cards that care about having artifacts or specifically equipment in play. And it's a good way to use your mana in the late game. Bard Batterfist is one of my favorite designs of this card because it's a 2-cost 3/1 at its core, but you can throw it onto flyers. And you can use the artifact and the 2/2 separately, and also it changes your deck construction a bit because you don't want too many 1 toughness creatures when you're using the Bard Batterfist. There's not a lot of 4 Mirrodin cards in this because the Mirrans are losing. The Mirrans are losing this war for Mirrodin to the Phyrexians. Tragic, I know. But there's only a few sources of real let's take Mirrodin back energy. And this mechanic represents that pretty well. I like the flavor of this set a lot. It's very cool. Oh, like that. Perfect. All right. Yes, this is going to be full of spoilers. Hey, Herix. You got here just in time. We just did for Mirrodin. All right, Proliferate. So this is a weird set for Proliferate. In the past, Proliferate is something that puts a counter on anything that already has a counter on it. So it already has to have a counter on it, but that includes permanents or players. And in the past, Proliferate has been incredibly strong at its surface because there's cards like in War of the Spark, lots of cards had +1/+1 counters, so a Proliferate would grow your board. That doesn't happen in this set, which makes Proliferate play very differently. There are no +1/+1 counters at all in the whole set. So there are 26 cards with proliferate at common and uncommon, which is huge, and would break the game if there were +1/+1 counters floating around, because then every 1/1 would be huge. There are 7 more at rare and mythic. There's only a few ways to repeat them. They're mostly at rare and mythic. There are 10 planeswalkers in this set, so the loyalty counters are relevant. You can plan around proliferating onto your planeswalkers. Usually there's 2 or 3. There are 10 in this set. Oil is a major mechanic, which we'll talk about shortly. Poison is a major mechanic, which we'll talk about shortly. There are also 5 indestructible counters, which you can proliferate. You can give something 10 indestructible counters. This doesn't do anything, but is fun. There is a rare called Glissa, can remove 3 counters from something. So there is a theoretical situation where you need to get 4 indestructible counters onto your mythic rare in order to keep Glissa from killing it. All right, oil. So oil is a cool mechanic. Oil does nothing by itself. It represents the Phyrexian oil that slowly corrupts people. There are 35 cards with oil counters. There are 26 cards that only use the oil counters in a vacuum. They only use the oil counters they make for themselves. There are 5 cards that care about other oil counters on other permanents or permanents with oil counters, and 4 permanents cards that put oil counters on your other creatures. Red is the color for divvying oil counters, and blue is the color for gaining more oil counters on time. Trawler Drake is a great example of this. Thank you so much for the subscription, Howdy. How you doing? Oil is a really cool mechanic. It represents how Phyrexia is proliferating throughout the plane of Mirrodin, and I love it. It plays so well, even though it doesn't do anything. Like, there's nothing that says oil does this. Trawler Drake gets +1/+1 for each oil counter on it. It tells you what oil does. I think they are doing it on purpose, Herix. All right, so poison counters. So there are 3, all of the mechanics have to do with poison in some way. This is a poison-centric set. So Infect was the original one from New Phyrexia. Now it is Toxic. Creatures with Toxic that deal damage to a player put a poison counter on it. So it also does the damage. It does the damage and the poison. When you drafted the original, the original sources of Infect, Scars from Mirrodin, Mirrodin Besiege, and New Phyrexia, there was this tension of whether or not you would lean into the Infect or lean into the regular damage. Because if you had a situation where you dealt 5 Infect, you would have situations where you dealt 9 Infect damage and 19 regular damage, and then still lost because your resources were so divided. But Toxic is a really elegant solution to that, because you're dealing damage, and this isn't a... Poison is going to influence how all of these games are played. So one of the mechanics is Corrupted. There are 15 Corrupted cards, and all the Corrupted cards care about having 3 poison counters specifically, which means that there is this milestone when you get that 3rd poison counter, even if you're not trying to kill them with poison. There are 5 cards that directly place a poison counter on something. 2 of them are green, 2 of them are black, 1 of them is blue. And then there are 37 toxic creatures. That is huge. That with 37 toxic creatures and 26 sources of proliferate, you will actually, there's a time limit on these games. All of your limited games have a time limit because poison counters will eventually just cause the game to end for one player or the other. That first poison counter is huge, that 3rd poison counter is huge, and that 9th poison counter is huge, and then the 10th one obviously ends the game. Life gain is a lot worse in this set, which is good because there's very little of it, because even if you stabilize against an aggressive deck as the control deck, they're still going to be proliferating and slowly putting counters on it. So you have a time limit. You can't just lock down the game and wait for your opponent to concede. You can't lock down the game and find a way to grind advantage out, because your aggressive opponent will still be proliferating and kill you with poison eventually. I think the clerics are pretty good. So like, there's a pretty sharp divide in the corrupted cards between you have to have Corrupted for this card to be any good, and Corrupted is a nice bonus. So Vivisection and Evangelist, this card is not good unless your opponent is Corrupted. And if they're Corrupted, this card is nuts. A 4-cost 5 mana 4/4 with Vigilance is average. A 5 mana 4/4 with Vigilance that kills any creature or planeswalker is insane. So that Corrupted threshold is really important. That 3rd poison counter matters a lot. All right, so we're doing something a little bit different than my past set reviews. We're going to talk about stats first. So there's 178 commons and uncommons in this set. There are 8 sources of fixing, 100, which is a lot, 103 creatures, which is normal. I did not count the flyers. Ooh, all right. I don't know how many flyers there are. There are 19 flyers. There are 19 flyers in this set. I just forgot to remove the other bit. There are 3 creatures with reach, which is very relevant. There are 12 combat tricks. There are only 2 burn spells that hit the face, which is pretty low. And there are 6 divinations, which is a little high. By divination, I mean any card that is strict. Yeah, sorry, I was using the old one. There are 6 divinations, and by divination I mean a card that generates 2 cards for 1 card. So either there's some draw 3s, there's some draw 2s, just strict card advantage. You don't have as much time to play them, but it's still a relevant stat. In terms of toughness, there are 22 creatures with 1 toughness, 27 creatures with 2 toughness, 24 creatures with 3 toughness, which that's high for all 3 of those stats. 18 creatures with 4 toughness, that's pretty normal. And then only 9 creatures with 5 toughness, only 2 creatures with 6 toughness, and only 1 creature with 7 toughness. And that is so low. The creatures in the set are very, 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 very small compared to regular ones. There's nothing that makes 4/4 or 5/5 creatures. There are some things that make 2/2s and lots of things that make 1/1s. This is a small set. Things are very low to the ground. All right. So that means that removal is really important. So the 1 damage removal spells only hit 23% of creatures, and they also hit mites. There's 2 of them. There's 2 damage removal spell that hits 46% of all creatures, and we'll talk about that more because that card is Hexcold Slash and it deals more damage to toxic creatures. There's 1 3 damage removal spell, which hits 69% of creatures, 1 4 damage removal spell hitting 88%, but the 5 damage removal spells hit a whopping 98% of creatures in this set. That's wild. Like, there's only 3 creatures, if we go back to the stats, that don't die to the 2 5 damage removal spells, making them premium. They're really good. There are 3 pieces of removal that will kill anything, 3 that deal a variable amount of damage. Those are fights and bites and damage equal to the number of creatures you control. There are 2 mana value heart. There are 2 spells that deal with creatures with a mana value of 3 or less. There's 3 effective pacifisms. 1 keeps it tapped down, 1 makes it so they can't attack or block, 1 exiles. There are 2 fights or bites, which I also included in the variable damage. There are 2 edicts, which are going to be weird and they'll get some extra time. And then there are technically 3 counter spells, but only 2 of them are playable. I love the Mite fight. We will be talking a lot about it soon. Mites are weird because they're essentially always going to be fodder. Like, if you have 5 mites and they have 4 creatures, then you are spending 4 mites to deal 1 point of poison damage. There are not, like, you have to build a mite deck. Mites are not inherently valuable. Minor misstep is not real ears. I'm sorry. We'll talk about that later, though. All right. This is where things are different. This next slide is important. All right. So, poison, as a core set mechanic, drastically changes how the games are played. Because there's no way to remove poison, which means you don't get to force the game forward or backward by stages. So, like, a lot of the times in a control deck, what you're trying to do is get stable. So you'll see, even like if you watch me draft, you will see me stabilize. Oh, hi Minxie, I'm sorry I missed you earlier. In the control deck, you will see me stabilize at like 3 life, and then I'll gain 10 life. And then I will slowly pull the game back in my favor. But if I am the control deck and you're the aggressive deck and you have 6 poison counters on me, it doesn't matter how much life I gained, I can't deal with those poison counters, which means we are locked into that late game stage. I can't pull us backwards. So there are milestones that you need to watch out for when you are building your deck and when you are playing the game. And so this is an aggressive set. You need to play to the board quickly, because that first poison counter is so influential. The first poison counter, you can see this Bilious Skull Dweller up here. 1 cost 1/1 Death Touch with Toxic 1. That first poison counter is huge because there are so many sources of proliferate. But the proliferate doesn't do anything if I don't get that first poison counter on it. So there's going to be a little war to get that first poison counter onto the other person. And that means that if I'm playing my 1/1 with Toxic, you better have a 2/2 to block it. If you have a 2/2 to block it, I'm going to try and have a removal spell for that 2/2 to get that first poison counter in it. Or I'm going to put down a 1/1 to try and block your 1/1 and prevent that first poison counter and play something that just puts a poison counter directly on you. So that's a little skirmish that you need to be aware of. And if you don't have a way to deal with that first poison counter or put that first poison counter through, then you need to change your game plan around one of these other game stages. So the second game stage is the third poison counter because of Corrupted, and that will change. So like if your opponent is blue, black, or white, black, and you look at them and say, I have 2 poison counters, I need to counter this spell, I need to spend a removal spell on this Bilious Skull Dweller, because that third counter on Corrupted, reducing the cost of Distorted Curiosity from 3 to 1 mana, that is a huge milestone. So pay attention to where that is. The third part of the game is going to be the engine, and that is where you get to play your mid-game staples, but there's a lot of ways to use mana in the mid-game. So like this Fair Basilica is a cycle of 5 lands. You can sacrifice it to draw a card. If you get to the point where you are sacrificing your Fair Basilicas to draw cards because you locked in your archetype early and you have these extra lands that turn into cards, or even just moving the equip costs around on your 4 Mirrodin cards, that is the engine stage of the game. So that's where people are going to be trying to assemble card ways to get their oil counters onto permanents, moving their equipment around, establishing better attacks. That is the engine stage of the game, and that is really important. You need to know what you're doing to either prevent your opponent's engine from generating value, and that could just be instant speed removal to stop, like paying 5 mana to equip the Bladehold War Whip. If you get your creature killed in response, then your opponent has just taken over the engine stage of the game. And then the last stage of the game is looking to close it. So Noxious Assault is what I have here because that is the easiest way to just put 5 more poison counters on a creature or a player. But you can also, maybe you're at 7 poison and your opponent is just proliferating. Or maybe they're at 2 life and you are trying to punch through with a few corrupted creatures to pump your team. Know how your deck will interact with these 4 stages of the game when you're drafting and when you build and from your opening hand. So this is a general guide, and there are other, micro stages and other things that you need to pay attention to, but these 4 stages are what you need to pay attention to when you build. You need to know how to close, you need to know how to deliver or deal with the first poison counter, you need to know how to deliver or deal with the third poison counter, and you need to know how you are generating value or damage in the mid game. All right, now I can look at these questions because I saw that people had some. Yes, questions. Also, hi Dalmore, hi Minxie. Yes, so the aggressive poison decks are something that you have to deal with. You need to get to the board quickly, and like cheap removal is really important. It depends on what your deck is doing. So if you have, okay, we're doing blue today, Ears, and we will talk a lot about this when we're doing blue. Because if you're a deck that is trying to deal the first poison counter on turn 2, that is really different from a deck that is trying to deal the first poison counter on turn 4. So like, if I need to have the first poison counter on you before you put a blocker down, that is a really different deck than somebody who is going to answer. So Bilious Skull Dweller is useful for this. So if I have a Bilious Skull Dweller in play on turn 1, and I am just trying to get the first poison counter in, so then I can hold blockers back and proliferate you out over the course of the game, then then that's my game plan. I need to build around that. If you have the Bilious Skull Dweller, then maybe I'm spending my turn 2 blocking or killing the Skull Dweller, and then playing the draw card, give your opponent a poison counter, and then proliferating up or dealing more poison from there. So that's exactly what I mean. You need to figure out when you are dealing the first poison counter. And if you are a turn 4 first poison counter deck, like you might be a turn 4 corrupted deck or a turn 4 first poison counter deck, but you need to have ideas in mind. Also, if you're on the play, mulligan hands without a 2-drop. Or if you're on the draw, mulligan hands without a 2-drop. You can't wait until turn 3 to start committing to the board. You can on the play. You also don't necessarily need to be playing a creature to the board on turn 2 or 3. You do need to be affecting the board on turn 2 or 3. And there are times when like a removal spell is going to be better on turn 2 than a unit. All right, so we're gonna get into the multicolored cards next. And then you don't need to aggressively draft 2s. You need to aggressively draft answers and things to do on 2. And your deck should be like at least 1/5 1 and 2 drops. That's not always true, but we'll get to the exceptions as we go. This is a really aggressive format. That doesn't mean you need to kill fast, but it means you need to be on board fast. And that's going to be affecting a lot of these ratings as we go. All right, so I'm going to talk about the multicolored uncommons first because that goes through the archetypes pretty well. And up first we have Cephalopod Sentry. So this card cares about having artifacts, and white and blue cares about having artifacts. This card is good at 3 power and it's a good blocker. It's a little bit fragile because it is a 1/5 flyer, and a 4-cost 2/5 flyer is almost good enough. 4-cost 3/5 flyer is fine. So I gave this card a 3 with a floor of a 2 and a ceiling of 5. Because if you can get this to be a 3/5 flyer that attacks for 5 on turn 4 or on turn 5, the card's pretty good. There are enough artifact creatures in this deck that you can build a good artifact deck that curves into the Cephalopod Sentry that makes it a creature that is good on rate, but you need to be drafting with it in mind. So I wouldn't usually first pick the Cephalopod Sentry, but there are a lot of artifacts and a lot of, like, if you have the Bitter Blossom that makes a might every turn, card gets amazing. Because it lets you pivot from offense to defense very easily. But on its own, it's not very strong. So I just gave it a 3, which is fine, like it's filler. And you can make this card better with some work, but it's quite a bit of work. Effort value, so average 3, floor of 2, ceiling of 5, effort medium. There are 46 artifacts that are good enough to play before the Sentry. And then there are cards like some of the 4 Mirrodin cards make this card a little bit better because you get an artifact that you can then suit it up with. It's a 5 toughness is a lot in this format. It dies to some of the removal spells, but survives a lot of them too. All right, Voidwing Hybrid's a doozy. So this card is a 2-cost 2/1 with Toxic 1 and Flying is good enough. That card is good enough on its own. That's really strong. I gave it a floor of a 4. And then I gave it an average of a 7 because blue and black has so many proliferate cards, it is really easy to turn this card back on. You will end up, this card is a 7 because of how it is going to play in this format. I was talking about the first poison counter in the game stage, and this card is good at every stage of the game. Because if you play this card on turn 2 and your opponent doesn't have a blocker in the air or a removal spell, then you're going to get that first poison counter in. If they do, you're really happy to trade this off for what, even if you're playing this on defense, it blocks most, because if we go back to our stats, 46% of the units of the creatures in this set will die to this on turn 2. It's higher on turn 2 and turn 3, because there's very few 3 toughness things for 2 mana, but it just keeps coming back. There's a lot of incidental proliferate. There's a lot of cards you would play even if they didn't say proliferate, and that pick this card up. The card is a 4 if you have 0 proliferate cards in your deck. Card is a 5 or a 6 at like 3 or 4 proliferate cards in the deck, and it just keeps getting better. In the late game, it's an evasive threat that keeps hitting, and both stats are relevant. 1 toxic and 2 power, both good cards, and you can just keep blocking. White does, there are a lot of ways that lock this card down. So you do want a few ways to sacrifice it, because there's 1 white removal spell that exiles it, but there's 2 pacifism effects that you want to sacrifice. It so that you can keep doing it. Card's very good. One of the better uncommons in the set. Charforger. So this card's a little bit of a build around, but at its floor, having 2 bodies on 1 card is very strong in this format, because looking at the stats, the 1/1 goblin it makes does get to block and kills 23% of the creatures in this format. There's lots of 2/1s. And sometimes you will need 2 bodies because your opponent is going to be fighting to get that first or third poison counter. And one card that generates 2 bodies is just good in this format. It's better than... So if this were just a 3-cost 2/3 that made a body, it would still be a 4 in this format. It is also a creature that generates its own oil. So if you chump block with that goblin, then it is a permanent with oil. And there are cards that care about number of permanents with oil counters that you have on your side of the board. And you will eventually get to draw a card off this. That first card is not that hard to get. So it's a good card. And if you can get more than 1 card, meaning that you have like skull bombs, lots of cards that sacrifice, it's very strong. Cinderlash Ravager. So this card's kind of a beast. I'm going to be revisiting this one. I only gave it a 4 with a ceiling of 6. And that ceiling of 6 is if you can... So just practically, this is usually going to be a 5-cost 5/5 that maybe takes out a 1-drop. But it will get you out of a pinch because it clears mites. Clearing somebody's mites or goblins is pretty relevant. Usually... This is going to be, you need a few cards with oil. Red and green cares about oil. Red is the best at oil. But if you, in a normal game, it's not terribly hard to get a 2-drop with an oil counter and a 3-drop with an oil counter, which means that you can play this as on turn 4 as a 5/5 with vigilance. You're not guaranteed to kill anything. In a heavy, the card's better when you get to play a 3-drop with oil, and then maybe a 4-drop that spreads some oil around, and then a different 5-drop. And then on turn 6, you can play this and another card. And this is a format where playing 2 spells in a turn is very good, and you want to do it often, because if you're just trading threats off, then the player who has the first threat that survives will win. And you need to break that disparity. So getting to play this in another spell is really cool. Really love this card. The ceiling of this card is a 6, so it's an average of 4 because you have to put some work into deck building, more so than like the Voidwing hybrid. The ceiling on this might be a little higher, but pinging doesn't do as much at this point in the game, so it's a little bit of work to set up. I'm going to revisit this and possibly raise the ceiling, but the average of 4 and the floor of 3 are solid, and I gave it a ceiling of 6. We'll see how it plays in regards to the rest of the mites. Slaughter Singer. So I started high on this card and I actually came down quite a bit because it doesn't have any evasion or do anything that special. But if you get... Most of the flyers with Toxic are in blue, and white has a lot of flyers, but they don't tend to have Toxic flyers. Being a Pseudo-Lord is pretty strong. This is a 4-cost 3/2. It's kind of, or it's a 2-cost 4/2 is how it'll usually play. Card's very strong. You do need to draft a Toxic deck, and you do need to be green-white. So that's why the average score is only a 4, but the ceiling is really high on it. So if you first pick this card, you get to treat it as a 6 because you're just snapping up Toxic cards. And if you're already in this archetype, you get to treat it as a 6. But it's not automatic. Like, you don't splash for this card like you might for some of these other multicolored cards. And Toxic on the ground seems to be green-white's thing, and Toxic to kill the opponent. So, like, there's not a lot of green and white corrupted cards. You're actually just trying to get to 10 poison. I love this card. This next card, you will splash for. So, this is a corrupted payoff that you can splash for in the green-white Toxic deck. The clerics are really cool in this set, Herix. So the Evangelist, you really need to be corrupted for this card to be good. You playing this on turn 5 is just 4/4 with Vigilance is pretty disastrous. But black and white have a lot of ways to blink creatures, and they have a lot of ways to recur creatures. So if you can turn this on, card's fantastic. It's best in the green-white deck with a black splash, or in the black-white deck with that third poison counter, where you're not actually trying to kill them with poison, you're trying to kill them with value. But you get to... The corrupted mechanic is so cool because you get to start aggressive and then turn that into value and be an effective mid-range deck. The black-white deck gets to pivot a lot. So you will most often splash this, like you can first pick this card, you can splash it in the green-white Toxic deck, or you can splash it in the blue-black corrupted deck. Weirdly, I think it's better in either of those decks than it is in just its black-white deck. It's the black-white, but you will often play this card. It's very strong. I mean, the cards that care about your poison counters are corrupted. Like, oh, you mean like your own personal poison counters? Nah, I don't think they want to incentivize... I would love that, but I don't think they want to incentivize people taking risks like that. I would be like, okay, 9 poison, let's deal 9 damage. Like, I would love a card that just a 3-mana burn spell that deal damage to any target equal to your poison counters. Would be so cool. I like that there's no way to get rid of poison counters. All right, sip of tea. All right. So, blue and red in this set care about oil counters, and they are the best at getting more oil counters. So, like white has oil, but it tends to spend the oil, and then that's it. But blue is good at putting more oil counters on itself, and red is good at putting more oil counters on other permanents. So this card is really cool. It has a high disparity between its floor and its ceiling. With I gave it a 5 with a floor of 3, a ceiling of 7, and medium effort. A 4-cost 2/4 flyer is hard to kill and a good blocker, and it doesn't have toxic, which means it doesn't die to the hex core slash. This is not an attacking card. This is a value card. But if you get to activate this one time, that loot and bolt combined is so strong. This is a card that you take first pick to force oil. And there's lots of good ways to combine the cards that put oil on other cards and the non-creature spell aspect to put oil counters on itself. Card gets really good the more you have and cares a lot about oil. So I'm actually going to go ahead and raise this effort value to a high a little bit later. Because this card is a lot of work, but the payoff is worth it. It's very neat. Necrogen Rot Priest. So this card is just good on its own. I gave it a 6. So that floor of a 4 is a 1/5 with Death Touch. That's just what a 1/5 with Death Touch would be. But it'll usually play closer to the ceiling because this is a Toxic Lord. So this is, it does have Toxic 3 on the 4-drop because of its second ability. When it hits a player, then it will deal 3 poison. That means that this kills in 4 turns if you have no other sources of poison, and chances are you have other sources of poison, you've dealt poison, and if you play this on turn 4, attack with a toxic creature, then each toxic creature deals an additional poison counter. So any toxic creature will make this a 3-turn clock. Chances are it'll be a 2-turn clock, and it makes every toxic creature hard to block. It's so good. This card is nuts. A dwarf? Yes. If you are one of these colors, it is worth splashing. If you are neither of these colors, you might. If you get past this card, something is weird. They open something nuts. If you get this card pick 3 or 4, then you should be this color, and it's worth pivoting in pack 2. Alright, Bladehold War Whip. So this is like a quintessential 4 Mirrodin card. Card's very cool, and it is at its core, this is a 3-cost 2/2 with double strike, and that's pretty good. The equip abilities of other equipment is marginally useful, but it's still useful. Like, it'll come up. Usually this is just going to be a 3-cost 2/2 with double strike, which is good enough on its own. And then later in the game, you will start tossing it around to whatever you need to attack. Double strike is especially useful because if you have a 2/2 with toxic and you give that +2/+2, it still only deals 1 poison. If you have a 2/2 with toxic and you give it double strike, it deals its poison twice, which means that if you put it on a Necrogen Rot Priest, it deals 6 poison in one attack. So I will be putting effort into equipping a Necrogen Rat Priest with Bladehold War Whip. This set is fantastic. Yeah, green's really good. Green commons are nuts, but we're not going to be talking about green until tomorrow. Today is white and blue. All right, Tainted Observer. This is the last of the Signpost uncommons. This card, so blue and green care about proliferating. This card's very good because blue and green proliferate a lot, and this card is great at getting the first poison counter onto your opponent. If you get to play this on turn 3, attack with it, deal 1 poison, then you don't have to attack again the rest of the game. I mean, obviously they'll try and kill the Tainted Observer, but you can just keep putting out units and proliferating, and this is a strong source of repeated proliferation. So Toxic is in every set. What is MC? Important. Some tea. Yes, so this is all the multicolored cards, and then this is the last multicolored cards. Last multicolored card. Okay, so we're moving on to artifacts. Atrax's Skitterfang. This is a great example of how oil is used. But this card is, I gave it a 4 because it's useful in just about every deck. So if you, it's one of the few sources of lifelink. If you play Atrax's Skitterfang on turn 3 after playing a toxic creature on turn 2, then it enables getting that creature through. If they have a flyer, you can give it Death Touch to make sure it trades. If they don't have a flyer, you just give it flying and punch in. Card's very useful, but you got to be a little bit careful because often this card will be a 3-cost 2/2 that just trades off with an opposing 2/2 after granting flying one time. It's really good with the oil deck though, and pretty useful. I'm actually going to lower the floor to a 3 because if you play this on turn 3 and you're on the defensive, it's not great. But I gave it a 4 with a floor of 3 and a ceiling of 6 with a medium effort because you have to think about how you're playing with this card. But 3 oil counter, like 3 uses of divvying out a keyword is a strong card. Dune Mover. So a 2-cost 2/1 with Toxic 1 is often what you want. But the thing about Dune Mover that I like is it fixes you without taking you off tempo. So some of the fixing we'll talk about shortly. It's really just hard to recover from spending it. Like Terramorphic Expanse is kind of bad in this set. We'll talk about that later because that tap land hurts so much. But Dune Mover being a 2/1 toxic means that it can both deal. It's the first poison counter again. It attacks on turn 3 to deal that first poison counter and help prevent the first poison counter from hitting you. So it is filler, but it's filler that you're not too upset about, and it's filler that you can pick up late to curve out your deck because you need a certain number of 2s, but this helps you make sure you hit your 3rd land drop. Like, it doesn't generate card advantage, but it does fill an important role in that game stage. Ickerplate Golem. This card, so it's a 1 if it's a 3-cost 2/3 with nothing else. It's actually a 2 if it's a 3-cost 2/3 with nothing else. But you don't put this into your deck if it's going to be a 3-mana 2/3 that does nothing else. You put this into your deck when it's going to grow your team. And a 3-cost Oil Lord. So when you're the oil deck, this is a card you want badly because it pumps everything that already came into play with oil counters, and it increases the oil counters that everything else comes in with. So there's lots of cards that just 1 extra activation, which we'll talk about when we get to white. 1 extra activation is huge, and this will enable that. It does only affect creatures because there are some permanents that will into oil counters, but still, this is a good lord, and I will often. So oil's kind of weird because you can be like a recurring oil deck where you put lots of oil counters down, or you can just have lots of creatures that happen to have oil counters. So you can first pick this card without committing to any set of colors, which I love. We'll get there, Dragon Jack. Mer Converts. I love this card. It's just a slightly better version of the Dune Mover because it does the same thing as a Dune Mover. It is toxic, which means that it deals with an opposing toxic creature and can inflict that first toxic, but it also jumps you from 3 to 4 mana on turn 2 or on turn 3. You don't usually want to use this for mana, but the occasional times that you will pay 2 life to make the mana are going to be worth it to you. Very cool card. Mer Custodian. So if this were a 3-cost 2/3 that scryed you 2, it would be pretty good. We had Chrome Cat in SNC, and that card was not great because it had 2 toughness. But if that card were 2/3, I would have played it. The fact that your opponent gets a scry 1 is not good news in this set. Not when those early turns are so important. Because when you play Mer Custodian on turn 3, and your opponent gets a scry 1, then they get to use that card before you do, and that matters a lot more in this game where that 3rd turn is key. So your opponent's 3rd turn is more important than your 4th turn, even though you get to scry 2. It does still have a place. If you have some nuts bombs, if you have a Wanderer, then you can still play the Mercy Custodian to dig, but you want to have better 3-drops than this. I gave it a 2 because it's not unplayable, but it's not great. You don't want your opponent to get access to the card they scryed away. That scry 1 that they get access to first is more valuable than a scry 2 that you get access to second. Yep. Mer Kinsmith. Here's another high effort card. mean, it should probably be a 1. This card's pretty bad. So this card, think of it like Gathering Throng, but you don't get to use the extra Throngs to loot them away. You don't get to play your 3-1 on turn 3, and a 3-1 on turn 4 is pretty bad. There are also only 3 Myr in this set, and we've already seen all 3 of them. Myr Convert, Myr Custodian, and Myr Kinsmith. So like in the last set, I'm lowering this to a 1. I guess. No, I just don't like this card. I don't think it's playable. In the last set, there was Autonomous Assembler, which was a 5-cost 4/4, and I didn't like playing that card unless I got one of the rare assembly workers. There's no rare Myr to make this card worth playing. You could be a Myr Kinsmith deck. I just don't see it. Phyrexian Atlas. So, Manolith, it's been good. Like, you could... there are lots of situations where Manolith is good. In the last set, you would take 5 mana artifact creatures pretty aggressively because you would have these power stones that you would generate on turn 3 off of like an Excavation Explosion or an Argothian Opportunist. But if you take turn 3 off to make a Mana Rock, then you are in trouble. You need to be able to block with what you play or deal with what your opponent is doing. So, but the card's not unplayable. So I gave it a 2 with a floor of a 2 and a ceiling of 4 because if you have a corrupted deck, so this card is weirdly better than, usually Manoliths are better when you have 5 drops. This card is better when you have 1 drops because you want to be able to play the Atlas and still play another card that affects the board in the same turn. You will still play this card when you need a little bit of fixing. You will still play this card in the late game proliferate decks that get, if you are good at getting corrupted but bad at closing the game out, then making your opponent lose 1 life each turn on your Mana Rock is solid, and there are artifact decks that make this card pretty reasonable. But you almost never take, you don't want this to be the first card you take in that package. This is a card that you get after you've assembled the package. It does make your opponent lose life at a relevant rate. But it's a deck building liability because if you cut lands for this Atlas and you don't have a turn 3 play after you just traded off 1 and 2 plays, you're probably going to lose. Prophetic Prism is a slightly better version of that card that does the fixing thing, but cantrip artifacts are not something that you want to have unless you have a reason to have artifacts in play. So like it's pretty low effort, but you want to pick up the prisms later. Splashing is easy to do in this format, but also a liability, which I will talk more about when we get to Terramorphic Expanse. It's a it's really cool. I love Prophetic Prism. It's one of my favorite Magic cards. But you want to have cards like this Signpost White Blue uncommon before it's good enough. You want to have reasons to need the fixing, reasons to have artifacts in play, because this isn't a turn 2 play. You can't take turn 2 off just to draw a card. You want to play this on turn 3 or turn 4 when you can also put another body down. So it's good if you are trying to fix like late game cards. So the ceiling is high on the Prophetic Prism. Good question here. The ceiling is high on the Prophetic Prism because you can, if you are both, there are cards that care about non-creature spells. There are cards that care about artifacts in play. There are cards that care about having alternate colors of mana. So if you have 1 or more of those things, the card gets a little bit better. You had to have 1 or more of those things to hit this floor of 3. But it's not hard to have 1 or more of those things. If you have all 3 of them, then the ceiling is a 5, and you do want Prophetic Prisms, because it's still a good card to play late in the game. Prophetic Injector. So I love this card. It's the only good 1 mana equipment. So it is only 1 mana to play, and only 1 mana to equip. It's good at enabling... Combat early is really important. So a lot of the equipment we're going to talk about today is just too slow. It comes down really late, and it's still good equipment, but it's not important for that first poison counter or that third poison counter. It's not important for those first 2 stages of the game. So the Prosthetic Injector is something that you can put on a creature that will let you win those early combats while still being relevant in the late game combats. And since if you will be able to predict what your opponent is doing in terms of tricks and instant speed removal, and moving the injector around is really awesome. for helping with that. Like, for instance, if you have a Bladehold War Whip, then this is a free equip, and you can move it around as often as you'd like to make this work. It's an interesting card to play with, and it's going to be very hard to play against. But when combat is important. All right. So when combat is unimportant, you have more time to set up your attacks. You have more time to bridge the gap in creatures. So like a lot of times a 1-mana 1/1 is bad in a given draft format because it doesn't do anything relevant before your opponent just plays out a 3-mana 3/3. Well, 1-mana 1/1s are pretty good in this format because what they do is so impactful before the 3/3 comes down. And Prosthetic Injector will help you bridge that gap in a small enough way that you aren't giving up too much of a mana advantage. So like often you will play a 1-mana Prosthetic Injector and then a 2-drop, and then you'll be able to equip the Prosthetic Injector and play another 2-drop so you don't lose that tempo. It's a very strong equipment. It doesn't operate in a vacuum. So I gave it a floor of 2, ceiling of 6 with an average of 4. I'll be taking it pretty high. It goes into a lot of decks, but not every deck. It's not automatic. Cool card, very good design. Rib Skip. In any other format, this card would be like a 7 or an 8. Because it draws a card when it comes into play and is a relevant body. The thing about Rib Skip in this format is it's really hard to crew. It is really hard. There are very few 3/1s at 2 mana. There are even limited 3/3s at 3 mana. But if you play this on... A lot of the time, a vehicle can come down on turn 4 and you don't have to worry about it being a creature until turn 5 or later. This card, you really want it to be able to block the turn it comes down for it to be any good. So I gave it a 4, which is really low for a creature that says draw a card on it. Rib Skip is still solid. The more 3/1s you have, so like one of the card I used to talk about for Mirrodin is a good example. This Barbed Batterfist. If you have 3 Barbed Batterfist, this card goes up to a 6. If you don't have any 3s at all, then the Rib Skip is not good. Like, you need to be able to crew it to block, and then you also want to crew it to attack. Toxic 2 is a lot, 4/4 is a lot. The fact that it draws a card is good. I say that I rated this pretty low, but it is, it's still a good card. You just have to think about how you're playing with it. This is a cool vehicle, Dragon Jack. I like it. It's dependent on your deck. So it is still a card you will usually, it is a little bit better in sealed than in draft. Because these scores usually refer to pick order rather than deck building. But same as this card brings up the value of your 3-power creatures in sealed. You do need card advantage, but like this is usually going to, you want to be able to crew this the turn you play it and the turn after you play it, and it's good to keep up defense with it as well. I like it. All right, up next we have a cycle of 5 arguably artifact cards. I mean, they're all artifacts, but they are arguably colorless. So they all have a floor, all 5 Skull Bombs. I gave a floor of a 3 because that is an artifact that cantrips in this set. 1 mana is very different from 2 mana. So being able to play the Skull Bomb to trigger your non-creature spells is really nice. And the fact that both modes draw a card means that this card will always be worth some amount of card advantage. I counted a few of them as divinations in that divination count at the stats page. But you can play this and then get rid of it after getting all of your triggers, or you can hold it for the late game and just give something +2/+2 and flying. And that's very relevant for that first poison counter, that third poison counter, or that closing the game stage. So 4 is pretty good on a 1-mana artifact. All of the Skull Bombs are excellent in the right deck and playable in any deck. So they all have at least a 3. So the Surgical Skull Bomb, I think this is the worst one. It's still very good. There aren't like, excuse me. So you can't do this at instant speed, which means that it's going to be pure tempo. But bouncing a creature, drawing a card for 4 mana is pretty good, even at sorcery speed. Ceiling of it is a 5 because you want this to be, like if you can play this on turn 1, get a toxic creature down on turn 2, and then turn 3 bounce their toxic creature to attack for that first poison counter. It enables that stage of the game. It is a little bit less good at closing the late game compared to the Basilica Skull Bomb, and that difference is worth 1 point. The black one is the strictest form of card advantage. It is not good at the first 2 stages of the game, but is great in the engine stage and good for accruing card advantages in late game. I counted it in that divination counter. I love the Skull Bombs. Furnace Skull Bomb. So cards really the cheapest activation, but you do need to have oil counters. But it's the kind of card you can splash like you can put a Furnace Skull Bomb with some of Murs or a Mountain with your white-black deck that cares about oil counters, that only has a few oil. Like if you have a rare that cares about oil counters, you can put a couple Skull Bombs in, splash the red, and if you don't happen to have your red source, you can just cycle it. And then the green Skull Bomb is best later on. It enables one big attack mid-game or a closing attack with the trample. You don't want to play this card. So there are enough cards that care about artifacts coming into play, that care about artifacts and coming back from your graveyard to your hand, or that care about non-creature spells being cast, not on its own. So you will play the Furnace Skull Bomb. So like that's what a 3 is. A 3 is a card that you need other cards to work with to be strong. If you have enough cards that care about artifacts and non-creature spells, then you don't need to care about oil counters. You can just use it as a cantrip. Terramorphic Expanse. So I gave this a 4. It has a lower floor than it has had in other sets. This card we see all the time. Like grabbing a land is really useful, and usually the floor of this card would be a 3 or a 4. But this format is actually fast enough that you have diminishing returns on your tap lands. So, like in Brothers War, I'd play 5 Evolving Wilds if I drafted 5 Evolving Wilds. I don't think I would with Terramorphic Expanse, because your first land come into play tapped, and your fourth land come into play tapped, but your second and third land cannot. You need to have untapped lands on turn 2, or you're going to fall behind. Unless you can make exceptions if you're on the play, but you don't want to lose on the draw to having too many tap lands. So your first Terramorphic Expanse, you can pick at a 4. I would not play a playset of Terramorphic Expanses, or I would not play more than 4 of Terramorphic Expanses combined with these. So these Basilicas are awesome. They're all really good. They do have the same problem as Terramorphic Expanse in that you are limited on the number of tap lands you can play, but you can play a more controlling deck if you have enough cheap interaction and just play a big pile of these tap lands. They're all really cool, great design. Compared to like the dual land, so they only make one color compared to the S and C dual lands. So the S and C dual lands, you would have people pass the turn with 5 mana up, and then on your end step, they'd sacrifice it to draw a card, and these, you can sacrifice them to draw a card and still play a spell in the same turn. These cards let you run more lands than you otherwise would in your aggro deck. So like, I'll play a 17 land aggressive deck that curves out of 3 with 3 or 4 of these, but then if I have that, I'm not going to be playing this Terramorphic Expanse. So I do think it's useful to talk about all the lands together. Very cool in general. I haven't seen any cards that care about spheres yet, because I haven't looked at all the rares yet. As an aside, I like looking at all the commons and uncommons first, and then drafting a bit, and then reviewing the rares. They need to be tapped ears because they can't be better than mountains. You can't make cards better than basic lands. I mean, obviously Wizards is doing that anyway, but you shouldn't make cards better than basic lands. Ooh. No, you can't ears. Don't do it. Alright, I will be right back. I'm going to refill my water and we'll get started with the white cards. See everybody in just a minute. How you doing, Dragonic? I got so hungry. I love granola bars. They're basically just candy plus cereal. Well, while I'm eating this granola bar, did anybody have any questions? If you think my mic is good enough for ASMR, I will do ASMR. It's a it's a fundamental tenet of what makes Magic great. That sometimes a deck can just have 24 basic islands. Hey, nostalgia. Your deck should be able to function off of basic lands. You shouldn't have to invest extra money to pick up Otawaras. I take issue with lands being strictly better than basic lands. It's really only pretty recent. Only recently, lands become strictly better than basic lands. Like, the Eldraine lands were good. I don't know the answer to that yet, Dragon Jack. Control. Hard control is the hardest. Brackus is legendary. Like, that pushes it to me, but it is legendary. Hey, Taxu. We just finished multicolored and artifacts. We're about to move on to white. How you doing, buddy? After this event, I'm going to try and sneak in a Neo Dynasty draft because I just found out that it's coming back. What even ASMR would I do? I mean, I could talk really quietly, but I don't really understand what ASMR is. Moving on to white. So the white values will seem a little high in this set, and that's because white is very good in this set. Blue, the cards in general are a little bit weaker, but reward building around a lot. How would I do MTG ASMR? If you got, I will do that if I will do most streams that 10 people want to see because it's fun. Can I do that on Twitch? Is that a thing, Nostalgia, that people do on Twitch? I thought they were like, I don't know, age guidelines. Back to the cards. I'll still answer questions about the cards between cards. I will answer questions unrelated to the cards after the color. Against all odds. So this is a very cool card. It is hard to use, so I gave it a high effort value. And that's just because there's nothing in the set that, like, there's no CMC 3 creatures that say destroy target creature. There's no reclamation stages. There's no raised deads at 3. There are some very good 5 mana enter the battlefield effects. So if you can use this card to take out, to blink like the 4/4 corrupted creature that kills a creature when it comes into play if your opponent is corrupted, then it's solid. But don't first pick it. You want to pick this card when you already have enough 3 mana creatures that you can pick up with it and good creatures to blink, because it's sorcery speed. You don't get to save a creature with it. You need to be generating value from that blink. Daijobu! Alright. Annex Sentry. I think this is the best white uncommon, and I don't actually think it's that close. So a 3-cost 1/4 with Toxic, I would play by itself. Like, I would play a 3 mana 1/4 Toxic. I had to think about that a long time, and I came back and bumped this card's rating up twice because of that. So the floor of this card at 4 is a 3 mana 1/4 Toxic, because 4 toughness is a lot in this set. It dies to Hex Gold Slash, but survives most other things. And it enables that, like, looking back to the game stages, it enables that key first poison counter, because it attacks well through all of the 2/1s and 3/1s, but it also clears a blocker if you played a 2 mana toxic creature. So playing a 2 mana toxic creature into an Annex Sentry is a good way to win the game. There are relevant artifacts that it exiles in addition to creatures. There are lots of cards that will return. Like, if you have 3 Annex Sentries, you can play it against all odds and pick up your Annex Sentries. We've seen this card before as like a 1/3 vanilla or a 2/2 vanilla. Now it's a 1/4, which is just so strong. You should take this card off. It's very good. So the one downside to cards like this, like Fiend Hunter in the past, is you would occasionally have to hit something relevant that your opponent would get to reset. So you would exile something, and then they would get another enter the battlefield effects. That doesn't happen. This just doesn't happen a lot in this set. There's very few 3-cost cards that, there's very few 3-cost cards that are bad for your opponent to get a second enter the battlefield effect on. But there's also cards that will like there's lots of creatures with oil counters, for instance, that will grow over time. And even if Annex Sentry dies, you get to reset those creatures. Tons of good targets. Apostle of Invasion. So this card would have been very good in other sets. In this set, you have to, if you are a deck that is corrupting your opponent, then this doesn't deal more poison counters. If this is a 4/4 with double strike for 6, it's still very strong, but a little bit fragile. I gave it a ceiling of 5 because the more controlling decks can use this as an effective finisher. But there are better flyers and better finishers, better ways to close the game. It's weird that this card is bad, because in other sets, a 6-cost 4/4 flyer was good enough on its own. But it just doesn't do enough. If you get this onto an empty board and attack with it, it ends the game in 2 turns. 3, but usually 2 turns. Dealing 3 poison to your opponent without dealing 4 damage is difficult. So usually you will get to end the game in 2 attacks from the Apostle of Invasion. But it's not the card this is not the card that did it. You got to do it because you managed to kill your opponent's flyers and deal with what they were doing. And in that case, Apostle is going to be the card you run after you pick up all the removal and relevant early creatures. It's just expensive in a format that can't handle too many 6-drops. Basilica Shepherd. Now this card is the better version of the Apostle. It's a little bit, so if this were a 5-cost 3/3 that just made 2 1/1 goblins, this would be a little bit better. The fact that the 1/1s it makes can't block is a liability, but it does let you choose which path to go down. Because if you make 2 1/1 mites with Infect, then you can start attacking with them and use a Basilica Shepherd to block. Otherwise, you have a 3/3 flyer. The card's just a lot of power for 5 mana. Very strong. Do be careful, because you can't run too many 5-drops in this format. Like, this is a card that people will be tempted to take 5 or 6 of, but you really just want 1 or 2 at your top end. It does blink really well. But 3 bodies on 1 card, always good. 3 bodies on 1 card, even though the 2 of them can't block, that Toxic is strong. So very strong white common. Bladed Ambassador. So earlier when I was talking about creatures with oil counters, how some of them would just use an oil counter occasionally, it would be this is the card I was thinking of. So Bladed Ambassador gets indestructible for the oil counters. The trick to Bladed Ambassador when it's on the other side of the table, you need to spend a removal spell to get that first oil counter off of it as soon as possible, because if your opponent gets untapped with an oil counter on the Bladed Ambassador, they get to start proliferating that oil counter. And once the second oil counter goes onto Bladed Ambassador, you're never killing it. And that's after this card is a 3/1 for 2 mana. So this is a 3/1 for 2 mana that gets impossible to kill if it comes down in the late game. This is a very good uncommon. It's 3rd best uncommon in the set. 3rd best white uncommon in the set. But just a good reason to be proliferating, reason to be using oil counters, reason to be aggressive. Charge of the Mites. So when I was listening to other people's content, this is the card I think I had the biggest difference on in playability compared to other people. I think this card's great because it is one of the only instant speed ways to put mites into play, which means that it is a mid-game card. Like, you don't use it that early, but oftentimes your opponent will be really excited to attack you for 1 toxic on their turn 3, and then you get to end step make 2 toxic creatures that both attack. There are very few game situations where you won't want one of these modes or the other. And the fact that both modes are relevant at pretty much any stage of the one of the modes is relevant at pretty much any stage of the game makes it a solid card. This is also the only way to put artifacts in at instant speed. And there are cards that care about artifacts entering the battlefield or change their power based on artifacts. We'll get to the Mandible Justicar soon, and that, like, this card makes Mandible Justicar better. There's a lot of niche uses for this card, and I really think it's strong. Complete Devotion. So this is a good trick. Tricks are great in this format because you need to win your early combats. You need to punch through with your toxic creatures through their toxic creatures. And if you have a 2/2 toxic creature and they have a 2/2 toxic creature, this lets you win the combat and draw a card. It's relatively easy to cycle. You do want to play this on a toxic creature. It's not great if you can't play it on a toxic creature, so it's better the more toxic creatures you have, but it's a solid trick. It's one of the better ones in the set. Crawling Chorus. Now this is a great way to punch through for that first poison counter, because if you play this as a 1-mana 1/1 and they have the removal spell, it's still a 1-mana 1/1. So the toxic creatures are dealt with in one of two ways. First is playing out a blocker, second is playing out a removal spell. That's how most creatures are dealt with. This is a unique format because your opponent has to deal with the toxic creature on turn 2. But this Crawling Chorus on turn 1 blanks half the ways that they can deal with the poison counter. So they have to play a blocker because you're not going to attack the crawling cores into their 2/2. But if they play a removal spell, then you get left with a might that will still hit for that first point of toxic. Card's very good. It's one of the better 1-drops in the set. Same scale as Eternal Quebec, but there's slightly more deck building restrictions, so the difficulties tend to be a little bit higher. And I also rethought how I was doing the Eternal set scaling, so generally all the numbers would come up a little bit because there's more disparity between the floor and the ceiling. How you doing, Quebec? This is a really cool card. So I made a post on Twitter Nostalgia about how there's an art color pie to this set. So all of the white cards have these like very, they all have lines leading back to a central figure. See, ribbons are a good one, or straight lines, or curved tusks. And well, I'll talk about the other colors too, but when we get to them. But it's the Dragon Jack taught me that they're called implied lines. So the implied lines are very good in this set. Duelist of Deep Faith. This card is deceptively strong. Is a toxic creature that only gets blocked by 5 other creatures on turn 2 or turn 3. So it's really good at hitting through. That first strike is incredibly value. Simple card. Take it high. It's the 2-drop you want in white. It's one of the better ones. And that first strike is just so relevant. That first strike lets this card attack through so many creatures that your opponent will have. And if they don't block, then you get your first poison counter. Flensing Raptor. Wow, Windrake has gotten a real upgrade. So if this card were just a Windrake with Toxic, it would be pretty good. The fact that it enables that first poison counter, even if your 2-drop doesn't have Toxic. It does, it only grows other flyers. It's still good. Like, you have to build the Toxic deck, but actually I'm lowering the floor. The floor should be the same. No, it's a good card. It's really good in the white infect decks, and it's pretty nice. Hey, Ricey, we're doing a full set review right now. All right, Gold Warden's Helm. So this is a 3-cost equipment. It essentially is a 3-mana 2/3 that leaves an equipment behind. It's not good unless you have other cards that use equipment. So if you're lowering the equip cost, lowering the cost of the Gold Warden's Helm, because there's cards in red that lower the cost of your equipment, or have cards that care about equipment in play, it gets a lot better. You don't want to first pick it, but if you are the equip deck, you can expect to get these late, and it's not a bad play on turn 3 because it does block and leave the helm behind, but you need to care about equipment and you need to care about cardboard. You need to care about squares in play. So that's what they say in Lords of Limited is squares in play for this card to be good. But if you have that deck, it's fine. It's not going to be powerful, but it's going to be useful. Hexgold Hoverwings has a very similar problem as the previous 4 Mirrodin card. Yeah, I mean, it's true, nostalgia, but it is a 2/3 for 3 because it makes the 2/2. So like, it's not a great equipment, but putting 2 permanents into play at the same time is relevant to a lot of decks. But that's why I only gave it a 2, because it's usually going to play near that floor of a 2, which was a 3-mana 2/3. And if you build your deck right, you can get it up to a 4, which is not worth building around, but is a useful piece in other build around decks. And Hexgold Hoverwings has a very similar problem. If you have, you want this card to get the Lord effect to pump your other equipped creatures for it to be good. Because like these 2 cards, Hexgold Hoverwing and Gold Warden's Helm, play really well together. Because if you have a turn 3 Gold Warden's Helm, a turn 4 Hexgold Hoverwings, then you have a 3/2 flyer and a 3/3 attacker on that turn. Card's fine, is a little bit weird on rate, and it's not a great blocker, but it's good in the equip deck, which I think there is a good equip deck. Incisor Glider. Card's kind of awesome. If this is just a 2-cost 1/3 with flying, it blocks really well, and you need good blockers in this format. This is a blocker you can play on turn 2 that deals with a lot of the attackers your opponent could have, including this Duelist of Deep Faith that we were just talking about. But the Incisor Glider, if you get to turn it on, it just makes combat a nightmare for your opponent. Because a 2-drop that attacks as a 2/4 is good enough on its own. You want to work with, like, you want to hit that corrupted. That 3rd poison counter is really important to turn on the Incisor Glider. But until you get that 3rd poison counter, then it's a good blocker. I mean, it's a war in nostalgia. I love the idea that like the Phyrexians were taking people apart and using their parts for other things, and they just had jars and vats filled with teeth. They're like, what are we gonna do with all these teeth? We feed through the vats. And Elishnorn's like, I have an idea. Indoctrination Attendant. So this card, a 4-cost 3/4 with Toxic 1 is okay. If you, the card, you want to have cards to pick up with it, because the might is relevant, but it's more important that you are either resetting your enter the battlefield effects, which there's kind of limited, or saving something from a pacifism. This is a very good card to sideboard. So if your opponent is like blue-white, make sure you have a few copies of this card in your sideboard. If you have enough relevant enter the battlefield effects, the card's fine. And if you have cards that care about creatures coming into play, the card's good. I like this one. It's just kind of fillery. Yeah, because that's when Scars of Mirrodin came out. We're back at We're back on Mirrodin. We were last here 10 years ago, 11 years ago. Infested Flesh Cutter. Your equipment deck can handle 1, maybe 2 pieces of equipment that don't make a body when they come into play. If this made a goblin that could block on attack, it would be a little bit better, but this is a purely offensive card. So if you can get this onto an Incisor Glider, it's fine. If you have a lot of evasion, it's fine, but you just have limited spots for this kind of equipment. You get to use, the reason the equipment deck works, the reason the equipment deck is good, is because for Mirrodin, lets you play equipment over creatures to keep your creature count high. This card does not do that. It's a solid piece of equipment, but it's going to be hard to find room for it. Hey Diva, how's it going? We're doing our full set review. Jawbone Duelist. Pretty simple. It's a 2-mana 1/1 with double strike. Those cards are good. They wield equipment well. This particular one is stronger than usual because if you play it on turn 2 and manage to clear a blocker, it deals 2 poison by itself. If you manage to play a Jawbone, this is the best card to follow up with. Where'd it go? This is the best card to follow up with Flensing Raptor, because then you get to attack for 4 and deal 2 toxic, and then Flensing Raptor itself can attack for the 3rd toxic to enable Corrupted. Very strong. It takes a little bit of building around, but the ceiling is really high on it. Leonin Lightbringer. This card's kind of awkward. Like a 3-mana 3/2 is good if you... A 3-mana 3/2 with Ward 2 is only good if you can give your opponent a reason that they need to kill it. But if you give your opponent a reason that they need to kill it, then they have to take a whole turn to kill it because of the ward. So it makes equipment better. It's good in the equipment deck, but there are just better 3-drops in this set. So you will play this card. You won't be happy when you have to play too many of them. And there are cards that care about rebels and cats. So if you have like the Cat Lord, this card goes up a lot because a 4/3 is much, much better in this format than a 3/2, and a 4/3 is something that they'll need to spend a removal spell on. But like you need a critical mass of 3-drops, so play it if you don't have other 3-drops. This is like a berserk monster. Maybe Dark Souls. So this card is weird. We're only doing the first half of the commons and uncommons today, Quebec. So I'm going white and blue, and we'll do the second half tomorrow, and the rest we will do after the early access event, which is this Thursday. Teeth Boy! So this is the worst. We've had 2-mana 2/1 lifelinkers that were first picks in other sets. The thing about the I thought it was just a card, but I guess it's Justiciar? Justiciar? How do I pronounce this? Justiciar. Yeah, this is a scary card. This will only... The problem with the Mandible of Justiciar is that it's a bad blocker. So you don't get to block this... You still need 2-drops. You'll play this card because you need 2-drops. But if they attack with it... I think you're right, Ears. If they attack with a 3/2 and you block, the card's fine, but like that's not always going to be worth the card, and you have access to better 2-drops. It also doesn't have Toxic. It will only ever have 3 power on your turn. So there is a deck that wants to put artifact creatures out on its turn quickly that you can get together where this card is fine. And those mites that put 2/1/1 mites into play, edits in speed to be a 4/3 blocker, making this card a little better. But that's the only way to put artifact in instant speed. So your opponent gets to attack into the Justiciar pretty safely. The problem with like a 2/1 lifelink, a control deck might want it, or a mid-range deck, because it lets them normally recover if they play late, or it lets them play a relevant second spell on the same turn. But if you have 8 poison, gaining 10 life doesn't do anything. So life gain is inherently worse in this set. You will still play it sometimes because there are aggressive non-infect decks, but they're not too common. So side it in against the red aggressive non-toxic decks. But you need a lot of artifacts to make it better than a 3. And I gave it a 3 with a floor of 3 and a ceiling of 4. Mirin Bardiche. Card's just too expensive to be, because a 5 cost 4/3 vigilance is not good enough in this set. If it were a 3/4 vigilance, if this gave +1/+2, I'd be a little bit more interested. But you play it in the equipment deck, and you don't play it happily in the equipment deck. It's just 4 of 2, ceiling of 3, medium card. Sometimes you will need one more piece of equipment, and you'll be able to pick this up very late. Sometimes you will be able to put it onto a relevant flyer, and it'll feel good, but it's not going to feel better than one of the good equipment. All the time, Quebec. I think in general, the games are going to go one of 2 ways. So I'll go back and talk about my game stages again, because I actually think that's the best piece of advice I've come up with in any of these set reviews. But the way Toxic is going to work is you'll often have games where you put out 3 to 4 poison counters early, and then you start attacking for regular damage on the corrupted triggers, and then your opponent will stabilize, and you will have to proliferate the last few poison counters. So the way you break board cells in this game is poison, because you can't get rid of poison. Orthodoxy Enforcer. Card is just bad. 4 cost 2/4 is not good enough stats. 4 cost 4/4 with Vigilance is fine, but it is not easy to keep 2 artifacts in play because all of the good cheap artifacts are Skull Bomb. If you pick up a lot of like Prophetic Prisms, you can get this card up to a 4/4 with Vigilance, but that's still pretty average in this set. Like, Vigilance is fine, but you don't want your blockers to cost 4 mana. Ossification. One of the best uncommons, probably second, maybe third. There's only one, so one of the downsides to Ossification effects, to Journey into Nowhere effects, is that if you play this card and then make an attack with a 3/3, your opponent gets to break open the Ossification at instant speed and block. There's only one card in the whole set, at common or uncommon, that does that, and it's an average card. It's we'll talk about it. It's in a few cards actually, but it's just a very good removal spell, very efficient. Deals with anything. You can play it on turn 2 to deal with an aggressive threat. You can play it in the late game to clear. You can play it in the mid game to clear a blocker. You can play it in the late game to kill something important. A great card. Only slightly worse is Planar Disruption, because it's a pacifism upgrade. It affects planeswalkers. There are planeswalkers with some passive abilities, but for the most part, you're pretty happy playing this on a planeswalker. It's just very efficient, strong removal. Only slightly worse than Ossification because there are creatures with static abilities. Plated Onslaught. I like this card. You're going to have lots of games with Mites, or this is Inspired Charge. It's going to play like Inspired Charge. If you can get it down to 2 mana, then you can clear a blocker and Plated Onslaught, which makes it a little bit better. So like Inspired Charge, you would have to +2/+1, same thing, but you could also kick it for trample. It was often telegraphed because you would have people getting up to 6 mana, and you couldn't play. Like, you'd have to set up for Inspired Charge because you would end step kill something. But Plated Onslaught, if you have artifact creatures, there's a lot of just incidentally artifact creatures, then and you can get this down to just costing white, then you get to play something with haste or kill a blocker and Plated Onslaught in the same turn. So I think this is actually a great way to close a game in that late game stage. That we are talking, like, this is a great finishing card, but it's also a not unplayable combat trick, because in a lot of situations you will be able to play Plated Onslaught to just 2 for 1 compared to Inspired Charge, because Inspired Charge, it was really hard to set up a turn where you attacked with a 2/3/3s and your opponent blocked with 2/3/3s and you got to Inspired Charge. But with Plated Onslaught, you'll get to play this as a regular trick a fair amount of the time. Hey Kafka. Oh hey, thank you so much. Oh, I messaged you earlier, didn't I? I really want to meet more of the people from the early access, because it seems like a really cool event. But we're doing, let me give you a quick follow. Very nice to meet you. Yeah! Kafka is one of the other VTubers in early access. There's very few of us in early access, but it's kind of great. I'm glad they let more VTubers in. We should chat later, Kafka, because I want to see if I can get all the MTG VTubers chatting a bit. Because I only knew Luna and Adam the Ant before. All right, Porcelain Zealot. So this card is solid. A 4-cost 2/3. Like, I gave it a 3 because like it's fine. But if you have in the Toxic deck, I'm gonna actually raise the ceiling. I meant to raise this card a little bit because in a non-toxic deck, the card's fine. But in a toxic deck, 4 power that you can divvy out has just been historically a very strong effect. And you get to hold this back as a blocker. Relevant 2/3 blockers are relevant because even at this stage of the game, turns 4 and 5, that 3 toughness is strong. It's a good blocker. I think it's what you want to do on turn 4. Because it affects the board immediately, it stays behind as a blocker, and it makes all your toxic creatures a lot harder to block. This is a format where that 1 extra point of toughness or power is going to be very relevant because it changes which creatures you're able to attack with. And you need to selectively get through different creatures at different points of the game. And the Zealot helps a lot with that. I like it a lot. I think it's pretty strong. I had to go through all of the rest of the toxic creatures, and then I meant to come back and bump it up a point. Also, just beautiful artwork. I think it's such a cool scene. I love the art in this set. The art in this set feels like such a world rather than a moment. Because like, just as an aside, like Brothers War, it was a war. We were in a war, and here it's a world, and things are happening in this world, but not necessarily in the order depicted. Like, you can read the cards out of order, and it's still a cool setting. Resistance Reunited. This card's beautiful. It's just such a nice moment. It's not that strong because you want to have equipped creatures. So if you can make this card into Adamant Will, you're very happy. Oh, thank you so much for the Lurk Diva. If you can make this card into Adamant Will, you're happy, because being indestructible is a hard effect to deal with, but you really need this card to be Adamant Will. So that means +2/+2 and indestructible. If you can give 2 creatures indestructible, it's better, but that's going to be so rare that I did cap it at a ceiling of 4. But if you can just give 1 creature +2/+2 and indestructible, then that's a great trick. If you can give, the thing about Resistance Reunited is if I have a 2/2 Rebel that's equipped with maybe a 2/4 Rebel because of that Infect Helm, and then another 2/2, you can target 1 creature to give it +2/+2, and then the other one will gain indestructible. So you can set up situations where you get a 2 for 1 out of this. But at its core, just 2 mana gives something +2/+2 is not good enough. So in the equipment deck, this card's pretty good, but you're not going to first pick it. Sinew Dancer. This is a divisive one against content creators. Really weird and interesting artwork because the focus isn't on the background character. The focus is on the sinew. This card, if you can't put Corrupted onto your opponent, then it's a 1 mana 1/1, and you'll get maybe 1 or 2 important taps through the course of the game. But if you can corrupt your opponent, then this will be a strong tapper. Like a 1 mana to tap a creature is very good, but it doesn't help you get through those early corrupted attacks. So it's kind of at odds with the rest of the game plan. Because if you play this on turn 1, it doesn't deal poison, then you play your toxic creature on turn 2, then your turn 1 play does not aid in getting that first poison counter down. Like, this is weirdly a late game 1-drop. But if you are playing this as a late game 1-drop, then you get to double spell very easily. You get to play this alongside another relevant spell in the same turn. So this is actually a pretty good card with, where is it? This one. So this Phyrexia, this card makes the Sinew Dancer a lot better. So this is a good way to turn late pick commons in an otherwise disastrous draft into a strong deck that can win the game. I think this card is fantastically designed. Swooping Lookout. I'm still on the fence about this. I have it at a 3 because a 1/2 blocker is just good. You just want to be able to block your opponent's 1/1 flyers from turn 1. There's not a lot to say about it. It wields equipment well. It's really scary artwork because all of those lines open up into mouths. I like this card. But you want to have things you can put on it. Like you want to have equipments or oil counters, or you want to care about artifacts. It does lots of little things pretty well. So you can get that ceiling up to just a relevant block in your deck. Building block. All right, so this is the card I was talking about earlier. This is the only way to kill ossification at instant speed in the set. Well, at common or uncommon. And the fact that it can become 6 mana exile creature is nice. You will usually be using the 6 mana exile creature mode, which is a lot. But answering anything is relevant. You're just limited on how many of these cards that you can play in your deck. What are you doing, Untapped? Why are you opening? You're limited on how many Vanish into Eternities you can play in your deck. And you want better removal. Like, this is one of the worst forms of removal you'll have in your deck, but it's still removal that you'll still need. It's just hard to justify a 6 mana removal spell in such a fast format. Veil of Assimilation. I spent so long looking for this card because I still had a different name from the translation. Card's not great if you are heavy artifacts. If you can play an artifact every turn, card's fine. But +1 and Vigilance is still a pretty low impact effect. So it's a high effort card. Not amazing, but if you can put some mites in to play at instant speed, it's fine. Zealot's Conviction. So this card is way better in this format than it would be in other formats because winning combat early is important. And you will often have a 2/2 and your opponent will have a 2/2 and you will attack because you need to get that Toxic in and you'll be able to kill it with Zealot's Conviction. The Corrupted is relevant in the late game, but really this is just a flash aura that gives something +1/+1, which makes it pretty solid. Alright, so we're going to go to blue next, but really quick, I'm going to take a drink of water, and I want to talk about these game stages, because I think it's important. Alright, so for those of you who arrived since I talked about this last, there are 4 milestones to games in this format, and you can't back out. Like, a lot of the times in control decks you'll gain life and you'll go back to the mid-range stage rather than being stuck in the late game, but that doesn't work because poison can't be removed. So if you have 8 poison counters on it, you're in the late game whether you like it or not, which means that there are 4 major turning points of each game based on every deck that every deck has to worry about. And so you need to think about these when you're picking cards and when you're building your deck. And those are the first poison counter that each of you get. That's very important, the first poison counter. The second stage is the third poison counter each of you get. That is very important. The third point I'm calling the engine, and that is the stage of the game where you can move equipment around. You'll be sacrificing land to draw a card. You might have a full engine set up. Maybe you're distributing oil counters or just drawing cards. And then finally, you need to know how you're closing the game, because you can't... In the past, you could play a control deck with lots of card draw and just wait while your opponent did nothing until you managed to get a good way to end the game. Either a big threat or an engine that punches damage through. But if you are just stalling out and you have 8 poison counters, your opponent will draw a card that gives you a poison counter and draws them a card, or kills a creature and proliferates, and you will just continuously get closer to death. So the fact that poison sets a hard time limit on how long your games can be is something that you need to think about at every stage of deck construction. Leeches. I haven't seen leeches in a long time, nostalgia. All right, so we're gonna move on to blue, and this is gonna be the last color we covered today because I start to lose my voice usually around this time. And tomorrow I will be back at 7 p.m. Mountain Time. I might do it earlier if I think I want to squeeze in some rares, but right now it's going to be 7 p.m. Mountain Time tomorrow, and I will cover the rest of the commons and uncommons. So up first we have Aspirant's Ascent. This is a great way to get that first poison counter, to punch through poison in the late game, or to just save a creature from a Hexcult Slash. So +1/+3 is a relevant body size, meaning that this is a solid 1-mana trick, but it's not, compared to like Shore Up, you can use this on offense as well. You can play it pre-combat and punch through. It's a good way to survive early combats. It's much better in this format than it has been in other formats because it's a 1-mana tricks are much better in this format. I like this card a lot. For blue color pie, for the art color pie, it's all of these winding lines. It's always curving, and it's got a very tentacle feel. I like this card a lot. Atmosphere Surgeon. So I gave it a 3 with a floor of 2 and a ceiling of 4. This is a good card in the oil deck because it builds up oil. It also lets you help punch through for those infect counters, for those toxic counters. when you are trying to do the corrupted thing, when you're trying to get through for corrupted. There's not a lot of reason to have a ton of oil counters on the Atmosphere Surgeon. I haven't seen a card that's creatures you control get +1/+1 for each oil counter on it. But it's a strong card in general, and you'll be able to get relevant flying. It is only on offense. You can't give it flying on your opponent's turn. Bring the Ending. So this is floor of 3, ceiling of 6. It's a low effort. This is a good card because Quench is a good card. You can play this on turn 2, like Make Disappear is a good card. And it's a lot like Make Disappear out of Streets of New Capenna because you can play Bring the Ending on turn 2 or turn 3 to counter a relevant spell. And it is relevant on turn 2. You don't have to commit to the board if you're able to counter what your opponent is doing with Bring the Ending. And then as the game goes on, once your opponent is corrupted, it will just counter anything. It's a very strong card, and it's not as hard to use as you might think. There is a relevant thing. So counter target spell unless his controller pays 2, and you counter instead of his controller has 3 or more poison counters. And the funny thing about Bring the Ending is this is a set where you need to cast non-creature spells, but you will if you have 3 poison counters, you can't Bring the Ending your own spell and pay it just to trigger the cast a non-creature spell. So just worth noting because I'm sure that'll come up sooner or later. Really funny. I think it was Frank Karsten who mentioned that. Chrome Prowler. Card's fantastic because a 3/2 with Flash is almost good enough. And with Chrome Prowler, when you tap a creature down and I need to lower this actually because I thought it iced and it does not put a stun counter down. It's still solid though because you do get to enable 1 attack or punch through. And on turn 3, you have a choice. You can either tap down an opposing attacker. You can play it after attackers have been declared to block something and use it as a removal spell, or you can play it on their end step to enable one of your own toxic attacks. It's a cool card, and it is also one of the few ways to put an artifact into play at instant speed, which is relevant to a lot of blue-white cards. Distorted Curiosity. All right, this is a divination, and the thing about this set is you and your opponent are both aggressively spending early game cards, and I wouldn't play a divination in this set often because if I play a 1-drop and you play a 1-drop and I play a 2-drop and you play a 2-drop and I play Distorted Curiosity to draw 2 cards and you play a 3-drop, that's pretty bad for me because even though I'm up a card, I'm down on tempo, and tempo is very important in this format. But if I am ahead at all, or if we're just trading poison counters, this incentivizes me not blocking your 2/2 with Toxic so I can get in with my 2/2 with Toxic because this is a real payoff for Corrupted. If you are, unlike some of the other Corrupted cards, this card is still playable without Corrupted. You can still just play it as a divination and be pretty happy. I like it a lot. The modes on this are very good because you're going to be spending... Card draw gets better when you have more cheap cards in your deck because you can play them all. It gets worse when you don't have time to play those cards. So this sort of bridges that gap. Escaped Experiment. Card's fine. Like, it's a 2-cost 2/1. If you have a bunch of artifacts, then it enables some attacks. It's like the Mesmerist or the Doctor Mesmerist out of Ravnica. Like, you will get to punch through some attacks and it's an artifact creature, but you don't really want to be playing this unless you are an artifact deck or care about having artifacts in play because it's a 2-drop that doesn't have Toxic, but you need 2-drops and you need to be able to block your opponent's 2-drops, so it's fine. Experimental Augury. This card is really good. It's just Anticipate, Proliferate. Anticipate plus Proliferate. And the nice thing about Experimental Augury is lots of cards in blue specifically say when you cast a non-creature spell, put an oil counter on them, and this will put an oil counter on it and then proliferate afterwards. But even if you aren't proliferating, it's still a fine card. So like this is better than Proliferate, Draw a Card, and Proliferate, Draw a Card is something that I would be playing in this set. You want to have reasons to proliferate, but this is also one of the cheapest ways to proliferate. It's only 2 mana. Eye of Malcator. Card's fine. If you play this card and don't have an artifact to turn it on, it's a disaster. But the Scry does help you get to an artifact to turn it on. The problem with the Eye of Malcator is if you play it on turn 3, it doesn't block. If you get to untap with it, then it's pretty good. But playing it on turn 3 to not block is a big issue. You can build around it and keep cards coming, but you just need different 3-drops or very good blockers on your 2-drops. This card's kind of a trap. I'm sure we will all lose to it a few times when your opponent has 3 of them. But if you get a poison counter in or a few early game drops, it's not going to be quite good enough. Like, this is a part of the 20 artifact deck, which I do think there's a 20 artifact deck. Font of Progress. All right, so this is a payoff for oil. If you are paying 3 mana to mill them 2, that's bad. But if you can get 4 or 5 oil counters on Font of Progress in your blue-red oil deck, the card's really good. It is counter to what the oil deck tends to want to do, because if you put oil counters on Font of Progress, you're not getting value out of it, and you're not getting most of the aggressive oil cards deal damage. So there are a few combos with this card. Like, there's a few cards that'll put an oil counter on a permanent every turn, and then it's pretty good. But it's still a finisher. It's good to have access to in the sideboard, and there's a few combos with it, but you don't want to just pick it flat. Exactly. That's exactly it, Beard Broken. You can build this up. So he's talking about Folio of Fancy out of Eldraine, which you can have each player draw X cards, and then each player mills cards equal to the number of cards in your hand. But you have to build it out. But it is only 1 mana, so this is weaker than Folio of Fancy, and it is harder to establish an engine to use to win the game out of a control deck because of poison, because you can't get rid of poison. But it is a reasonable card that you can build out into a win con, so it's not worth dismissing outright. Gitaxian Anatomist. So a 4-cost 2/5 that proliferated would still not quite be good enough. And the fact that it can't block when it proliferates is a big drawback, but it is very hard to kill. So some decks will have a place for it. I'm not a fan of it. I gave it a 2. It's usually going to play at a 2. You can get it, I'm lowering the ceiling. You can get it up to a 3 with some work, and I don't think it's going to be worth the work. Gitaxian Raptor. So this is nice as a 3-mana 1/4 that comes in with oils, because cards care about rectangles with oil on them, and this is a hard to kill rectangle with oil on it. It's also a great blocker. Think of it like Mistwalker out of Kaldheim. It blocks really well, and it attacks really well 1 time, but hopefully you won't need it to attack well more than 1 or 2 times. So it blocks until it doesn't, and you can put more oil on it to get a second attack. So oftentimes it'll be a 3-mana 1/4 that blocks pretty well. Your opponent can't attack your 2/2s into it either, because you'll remove an oil counter from it. Be careful in how you play it, because you don't want it to get a Hexgold Slash by removing 2 counters willy-nilly. But it's a cool card, and it's best in the oil deck as a blocker to maybe turn on your Font of Progress engine. Listener Seer. I actually jumped around on this card a lot. I believe revisiting it. It's good when you care about scrying every turn, which means it's good. So 2 things need to happen for this card to be good. You need to care about having squares with oil on them, rectangles with oil on them, and you need to care about scrying, which means you have to have, like, you always care about scrying, but you need to have something worth digging for. But a 1-drop that scries, if you can get it scrying every turn, is really pretty good. It's the fact that you only get to scry 3 times that makes it a little bit weak. Like, that on your 1-drop, so like, you don't necessarily mind that you can only activate Gitaxian Raptor 3 times. You do mind that you can only activate Glistener Seer 3 times, because if you play it on turn 1, pass, and then turn 2, pass, then end step you scry 1, untap, upkeep, scry 1, then you only get 1 more scry off of it the rest of the game. And if you care about having rectangles with oil on them, then it's a little bit weak. So it'll usually play closer to a 2 than a 4. Like, this would act, if I did decimals, this would be like a 2.5 or 2.6. But it has a place, especially in the oil decks that are trying to assemble engines, because it's not a bad blocker early on. It blocks a lot of the 1 and 2 drops. Icar Synthesizer. This is a cool card. It's a good blocker. It's a 2-mana 1/3, and it'll usually play closer to the floor. It's similar to the Glistener Seer. But in the decks that care about having oil counters, it's very good. And a 1/3 that turns into a 3/3 later. Oh, it can't. I literally did not realize that it can't be blocked. So that's actually really pretty good. It's not going to change the rating. But on the 4th oil counter, then it becomes unblockable, and that's good. So this is specifically good in this format because being a 1/3 for 2 mana is actually good in this format. You want to be able to block early. Malakator's Watcher. So there's lots of 2/1 flyers or 1/1 flyers with toxic and just 1/1s with toxic in general that you want to be able to block. And the fact that you can block and then draw a card is nice. This is also an artifact creature, which white-blue cares about. It wields equipment well, which blue-red cares about. And it is a body that replaces itself, which blue-black cares about. You want to be able to draw a card or recur it. You want to have more use than just being a 1/1 that dies into a card. But it's really easy to have more use than being a 1/1 that dies into a card. Alright, Meldweb Curator. Card's fine if you have good instants and sorceries to pick up. It's bad if you don't. 4 cost 3/4 is fine, as this card's always going to just be fine. If you have good rare instants and sorceries or a lot of good removal and card draw, card gets a little bit better. It's good if you are a corrupted deck with the with the divination that comes down 2 mana. Oh, I suddenly got glare. Alright, where was I? Meldweb Curator, Meldweb Strider. Alright, so earlier we talked about how the 4 mana vehicle that crewed for 3 to draw a card was a liability because having crewing for 3 was difficult. This is the same problem, but it doesn't have draw a card attached to it. It will have a place in the oil deck, and it's not great otherwise because a 5/5 that isn't a 5 mana 5/5 that isn't always a 5/5 is bad. You can make it work, but you'll never be too happy about making it work. I'm dropping this. No, because you can get it if you have the right deck, if you have enough creatures that are good at crewing it, and creatures that are good at putting oil counters on it, and creatures that care about oil. But I might raise the effort value a little bit. Mesmerizing Dose. It's just solid removal. Having a creature to proliferate, like, it's not great removal because it doesn't deal with everything, and it can be, you can free the creature, but having Proliferate attached to a creature is nice. Proliferate seems to be worth about 1/3 of a card, just because you can't actually increase creature's power much with it. But this is almost good enough without the Proliferate, so the Proliferate does put it to the top, over the top of being playable. Minor Misstep, don't play it. It counters like 4 spells in the set. None of them are worth countering. And if you play an island, even if you decide to run this card and you have a 1-drop and your opponent has a 1-drop, what do you do if you have to start a Terramorphic Expanse or an island that comes into play tapped? Tragic. It's no mental misstep. Prologue to Phyrexia. So I talked about in the stages of the game, the first poison counter. The first poison counter is important and relevant, and this is instant speed, which means that if you are a more controlling deck, you might not have a unit of creature to put down on turn 2, but if you have a Prologue to Phyrexia and a removal spell in your hand, you get to just pass. If your opponent plays a 2-drop, you get to kill the 2-drop, and if they don't, you get to give them poison counter number 1, and then you get to start using your mesmerizing doses to slowly increment that poison. So that's how control wins in this format. Control wins by putting that first poison counter down and then proliferating on its removal spells. So, like, this card is really cool and so simple. This is a really elegant design. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if this was the very first card in the set that they designed. It does, and some that don't. It goes into some decks that don't care about poison. Like, it's a 4 because you don't necessarily want this to be the first card you pick. I'm raising the 4 to a 3. But this is one of the better blue commons. I'm gonna actually go ahead and do that. It will almost always play near the ceiling, and you're even okay drawing in the late game. Like, the thing about the Proliferate cards is so often these 2 and 3 mana Proliferate cards are just not going to have a counter to Proliferate. And that's fine, but the Prologue to Phyrexia solves that problem. It's a very good blue combo. Alright, Quicksilver Fisher. Card's fine. If it drew a card, it would be better. Like, it's a 5-cost 4/3 flyer, and it's a good body for closing the game. It's better in control decks. It doesn't block very well, but it attacks really well. Like, the looting is minor. The fact that it's a 4/3 flyer is why you play this, and having 3 toughness is a bit of a liability, but it's okay. Reject Imperfection. It's good when you care about proliferating. Cancel is just usually going to be a 2. If you have good... This card goes up the better your 2-drops are. So if you have a 2-drop with Toxic, then you can deal that first poison counter and then counter their 3-drop and proliferate. Card gets a lot better. This card has a much higher ceiling than cancels usually have. Your theory holds merit. You do not. I don't know who... Do we know who Sarnvax is? I haven't seen that card yet. I might like this card, and you can take it early and draft about around being a more controlling deck. Serum Snare. So bounce spells are better than they've been a long time. Also, I think this is the only one. And you can... If you play this early and manage to proliferate a toxic counter, then great news. You just got a lot of value. You can play it on your own creatures to reset their enter the battlefield effects for the proliferate, and clearing any relevant permanent is nice. It's been a while. These cards have been targeting only opposing permanents for a while, so having both modes is nice. It's just good removal in such a tempo is better in this format than it's been in a while. Mono blue poison is not... Mono blue poison is actively strong ears. Like, the only reason not to be mono blue poison is that you don't have access to early toxic creatures. So, like, you can pair with white or black and have a very strong white-blue deck. I think one of the best decks in the format is probably going to be blue-black corrupted splashing white for the multicolored ETB kill a creature. Because, like, you can Serum Snare that and be pretty happy. Tamiyo's Immobilizer. So this will often play like Icy Manipulator. It's best if you have a few other ways to put oil counters on stuff, but you don't really need them. Like, this is a tempo-oriented format. So if I play this on turn 4 and you only have one blocker, I get to tap your blocker. Otherwise, I get to pass and then tap a blocker, untap, tap another blocker. But you don't have to put any mana into the Immobilizer to tap a creature. So you do want to try... You will also have games where you cash in all 4 oil counters and then grab something that puts 2 more oil counters on something and get to grab a win that way. Because it doesn't go away when the last oil counter leaves. It's a good artifact, and it's not... like, it's no Icy, but it is a little cheaper than Icy because you don't have to use any mana. It's a cool card. Tamiyo's Logbook. So this one's a lot of work. If you have... Let's say you have 5 other artifacts in play, and then on turn 4 you get to play this. Then you spend 4 mana to draw 1 card, and then 5 mana to draw 2 cards, and then 6 mana to draw 3 cards, 7 mana to draw 4 cards, but 8 mana to draw 5 cards is where the card becomes strong. So you need a more controlling deck to take full advantage of this card, and your more controlling deck needs to also have a lot of artifacts. Like, even if you get this down to 2 mana, it's still fine, but it comes down on turn 3, and then you can just choose not to worry about it and cash it in for an extra card whenever you have time. My worry is that you won't have time. It's hard to find the time to cash in the cards on here, and it's hard to be a controlling enough deck to take advantage of the logbook while also deploying threats of your own. But if you have enough artifact creatures, I do think it's a good card. You just have to it's a lot of work and deck building restrictions to make it strong. Thrumming Bird. This is another card that I am way lower on than other content creators. So it's a 1/1 that proliferates when it hits. This is why you need the first poison counter. So Thrumming Bird in other sets has been great because you can play it on turn 2, and then on turn 3 play a 2/2 with the +1/+1 counter and then proliferate it. But you can't do that in this set. So the ceiling on it is high, 5, maybe even a 6, I'll revisit, but it doesn't do enough on its own. You need to already have a poison counter on your opponent or something that comes in with oil counters. But if you play a Thrumming Bird turn 2 and the prologue to Phyrexia is on turn 3, that's pretty good. Like, it's not... I would rather have a 1/1 with Toxic unless I'm the oil deck. Yes. The fact that it can't grow creatures is the problem with Thrumming Bird, but we will even look at a few cards that it does grow that make it a lot better. Transplant Theorist. So this is one of the payoffs for being the artifact deck, and it's a pretty good payoff, and it's nice that you can't mill with it. Like, this is part of a heavier control deck, which heavier control decks are inherently a little bit weaker in this format because life gain doesn't do anything. So it's a cool card. You'll play a lot of... You need a lot of artifacts to make it good, but you get to play a few extra lands and then dig through your deck, and if you get to the extreme late game with this, you'll probably win. Trawler Drake. So I love this card because it does grow with counters. So Throwing Bird into Trawler Drake alone makes Throwing Bird so much better because you can turn it into a 2/2 right away. This card at a 2/2 is a Windrake. That's a 3. This card at a 3/3 would be a 4. And it just keeps going up from there. It grows with every non-creature spell and grows with anything that cares about oil. It's just really good. It's one of the better uncommons in the color. And an otherwise pretty weak color. Unctus's Retrofitter. Card's really good because a 3 mana 2/3 with Toxic 1 is good. And if you manage to hit a Prophetic Prism, then you just paid 3 mana for a 6/7. Card's really good and needs a lot of artifacts to work. There are other artifacts. Like there's even artifact. It's not hard to have an artifact in play. Even the lands. There's artifact lands. These are not them. But the spell bombs and you can turn Whip Skip into a creature or Prophetic Injector. Prophetic Prism is the best one. There's lots of good cards to turn into artifacts with Unctus's Retrofitter. Vivisurgeon's Insight. So draw 3 cards, proliferate. Pretty good if you are a controlling deck or a corrupted deck. You are likely to have your opponent on 1 poison counter when you play this. You just have to be careful on how many 5s you're running, or else this 5 mana draw 3 proliferate would normally be a lot higher. But you are limited on how many 5-drops you can play. It's still a pretty good card. I give it 4. And Watchful Blister Zoa. So this card, as a 6 cost 4/4 flying, that when it dies, draws a card, is really pretty strong. If you get a few more oil counters on it, it's great. It is hard to get oil counters on this card unless you are red. But I'll still play this card as just a 4/4 that dies into another card. It's very cool. So this is the last blue card. So that's it for the day. If you have any questions, ask them now. I'm hyped. This set looks great. So you can judge the complexity of the set by the difference between the floor and the ceiling and the difficulties. So like, the last set didn't have a lot of those because the card was just good or bad without anything in between. But like all of these cards have these differences in scores because you have to build a deck with them. Like you need to evaluate how strong your cards are as you go based on what other cards are in your deck. Love it. I love it. Oh, I think it is 2 years. I'm really excited for this set. So that is it for the set review. I'm gonna get some more water, and then we're going to do an arena draft. I want to draft Neon Dynasty. But I'll take any questions if anybody has any questions. And I'm gonna do 1 Neon Dynasty draft. Really just missed Neon Dynasty drafting. You want to duel yours? We can duel. Pick what format do you want to do?